Myself, Robert Early. To my right, Daniel Hansberry, and joining us remotely is Paul Bergeron. First matter to discuss is to approve the minutes of the public and non-public sessions. Can I get a motion to accept the minutes of the public meeting minutes from September 15th, 2022, accept them and put them on file?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
I'll second that. Can you hear me okay?
Hear you fine, Paul, thank you. Any discussion? Without any discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed, nay. The minutes are accepted. Can I get a motion to approve the non-public minutes from the meeting on September 15th, 2022, accept them and put them on file?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries. Next item is communications. We have none. Unfinished business, there is none. New business, Mike Terrell, June Perry from Vision Government Solutions, presentation of values. Mike?
Thank you very much. We're going to cover the what we did with the hearing process first, and then we'll go over the values, the different changes there. So you have a sheet there that covers all of the process from the hearings that I'll just go over briefly. So the hearing timeline was we started August 29th, and we wrapped up on the 23rd of September. So a little under a month of doing hearings. Once you approve the values and so forth and the changes, we'll be sending out an impact notice, a second impact notice to the people that had a hearing or was affected by the hearing. Sometimes someone may not come to a hearing, but they may have a street or a condo complex might have an adjustment, and it'll affect more than just the person that came to the hearing. So there were 28,711 notices that were mailed out, and we had a total number of hearings of 1,553. Parcels reviewed and affected by that was 1,767. Some of those might have been, like I said, people that didn't go to a hearing, or some people come in with more than one parcel at a hearing. So the percentage of the total parcels reviewed is 6% approximately. That pretty much stays in line with what we've seen, maybe a little bit higher. We've been seeing 4, 5, 6%. So it's definitely within the average from the other communities that we're working on. So of that 1,767, there were 876 that had no changes from the hearings. And then there were 619 that had changes. There were 159 that canceled or did not show up. And then we had about 94 re-inspections. If we go through the hearing process and the person feels or we feel that it'd be better to verify the information that they're bringing, we went out and inspected some of the properties. And then re-inspections with no change, there were 19 of those. So the number of residential hearings was 1,545. And then again, the number of parcels with no value change was 935. The number of commercial hearings were 222. Number of parcels with no value change, 178. So the total percentage change was about 25 million down, which is a pretty small number compared to the size of all the values in the community. So it was really only went down like 0.2%.
0.02 or 0.2?
I think it's point. Yeah, 2.2, which is 2/10. It shouldn't be a 0 in front of that. 0.2.
0.2, okay.
That was a typo. So 0.2%. That's still fairly common with other communities on average. So the next thing I wanted to go over was, when we had our meeting on the 4th, I went over preliminary percent changes in value ratios. So we have another group of data that I presented to you here. During the time in 8.4,
questions on this?
oh, I'm sorry.
Well, could we ask a couple of questions on this?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, the number that you gave at the last meeting, you had said that there were 1,750 properties, people had requested appointments or had appointments, and there were another 650 that were still to be completed. So that's different than the number you gave us here, correct?
Yeah.
At the last meeting.
No, I thought it was
no, we
1,200 and
We
then,
didn't give any numbers at the last meeting.
The last.
There weren't any, were we referring to something else?
You mean the meeting on the 4th?
I think
No.
the Director Kleiner had given us numbers like 1,750, and then they were anticipating another 650.
Right, so
properties.
those would have been included in these numbers. So at that point, we already knew how many in total, and that was just a quick estimate from our conversations from one of our meetings.
So the 2,400 in reality became 1,551, is that correct?
No,
The 1,767,
right.
total was 1,767.
yeah.
Residential's was 1,545.
Okay, all right.
So it's a little confusing because the hearings were 1,553, but properties impacted maybe not from a hearing or having more than one parcel at the hearing. The parcels that were reviewed is more than the number of hearings we had.
Right.
Yeah, and then maybe the 600 was the number of changes from hearings or something. I'm not sure, I wasn't at that meeting.
Right. And then I guess a couple of questions. The mood of the property owners when they came in, how would you describe the vast majority of?
Excellent.
Excellent.
The feedback I got from the team was that everyone, 99% of the people were just really good at embracing. Some people come in a little concerned, obviously seeing the big change, but once they were educated on, like, that's more of an average change, and you're in the average, and let's take a look and see, these are the sales we use. We tried to have enough information to answer all their questions. Again, some of them we couldn't, and we had to go out and look at the property, obviously. But the feedback I got from the team was that the people were genuinely nice and professional.
And the overall knowledge of the property owners that came in, were they well aware of the fact that values had skyrocketed, or were they caught off guard by the change?
I think most of them knew, but there were times when people came in a little shocked of the large number increase. But the market, this is why there was only 6%. I mean, things went up quite a bit percentage-wise in 4 years. But it's happening everywhere. And everyone, it's just so more out there with Zillow and all these internet things, and people can just push a button and get a range of where their value is in 10 seconds. They don't even have to get an appraisal or anything. It may not be maybe within a percentage, but they know and they hear, oh, the market's up 10, 12% this year and for the last 4 or 5 years. So I think people in general are very aware of it. They just, I think, like anyone, they're probably more concerned of the impact of the bottom line.
And the entrance rate in the end, what was the entrance rate that you had?
Oh, do you remember what it was?
I don't have it on me, but I think it was around 28%.
And how does that compare to historical averages?
Well, considering COVID and everything that we've gone through, unfortunately, years ago, we used to get into a lot more properties, but now we don't get into as many. On average, about a third. So it was in the range. And, these were unprecedented times that we had to go through, too. So it wasn't that unrealistic. And now with so much technology, with, Eagle View with the aerials and with MLS and all these other services that we have, you can really get a lot of information beyond just going into the home.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
Paul, I have a question on the number of changes from the hearings. There were 619, but only 113 required a revisit to the home. The other, I don't know, what, 500 and some odd, how were those resolved just from the meeting? Just in
Yeah.
general?
So a lot of times there were things that they would just give small items like, we don't have this shed, or my siding is this, and things that were pretty obvious. And again, we can go into the record and look on the aerial too and kind of take a quick look. And you got to realize that it was a 2-year process. So they might have had the shed 2 years ago when we went there,
Yeah.
and then they took it down. So it's fluid. So if it was something that was reasonable, or they had documentation, people would bring in documentation, something like, I have a right-of-way, shouldn't that count for something? Here's the deed, this shows the right-of-way, or they say, no, I have topo in the back, here's a picture, and you can see the house, and you can see the topography. I mean, if there's things like that, and a lot of things were mailed into us after also, so we explained to them that we can't make the change without some kind of a visual thing or something. Oh, I have stuff, can I send it to you? So we would wait to get the information in after the hearing and then make the decision.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Sure.
Paul Bergeron, do you have any questions?
He's on mute.
Sorry, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Mike, thank you.
Sure. So I'll just go over this quickly. These are just the percentage changes. So what I did here was the land class changes. The old was the 8-4 meeting. When we met last time, we gave you the percentages. And then after we weren't quite finished with all the work at the time. I think I had said to you that we're wrapping things up. We got to get the approval with the assessors, and we're touching up some of the commercials and some of the condos. So including those changes and the hearing changes, the new percentage is to the left of the document, and to the right is what we started. So the single family pretty much stayed at the 41%. The residential condos went down in the total change from 48 to 43, and mostly that was some complexes that we were wrapping up after our date with you. We were still doing some changes. So that's where that came from. The two-family was only off by 1% at 54 instead of 55. The three families at 54 instead of 55. The apartments came down a bit, but I think that they weren't fully done at the time. We were still working on some of the complexes. So I think a lot of that was, it was just not, the commercials were lagging a little bit behind at that meeting on the 4th, and we hadn't finalized. Vacant land stayed the same. Commercial went from 5 to 6, pretty much the same. I believe the apartments and the industrials were the two items that the team was still working on for finalizing values. And that was up. And that makes sense because the items in the market for the commercial and industrial that are strong right now is the industrials. I think with COVID and a lot of demand where the brick and mortar is taking a little bit more of a hit, a lot of people are doing things online and having stuff delivered. So the Amazons and the type of businesses like that are looking for a lot of industrial space. You see it everywhere. So there's more of a demand for the industrial, from some of the effects of the COVID. And I think now just the way people are just going to be doing business going forward.
Yeah.
Mixed use was 47 and 42. There was a little bit of work being done. And then the manufactured homes was 79 instead of, and it was 81. That's pretty close. If we look at the percent change on the residential side for the styles, I think in general, you'll see that they're almost very similar, hardly too many changes. Seeing that the single-family change that we estimated at 41 is still holding, the split level's the same, colonial's the same, race ranch the same, modern contemporary down just a couple points, and conventional down 1, and Gambrel down 1. But in general, they're in that low 40 to mid 40 range, which ties in with the average for the combined of the 41%. Any questions on the percentage changes?
Oh, any questions?
No.
All right. Now, the next thing we had given you by land use code and by style and by neighborhood, the assessment ratios for the sales that we used, the counts, the mean, which is the average, the median, which is the midpoint, and the COD is which the coefficient of dispersion off the median. And the COD, just to refresh your memory, is really just how far out the range of sales were from the midpoint. If you have that, like I talked about before, if you have a chart and the bell curve is tight and close, you have a low COD, which shows a lot of equity. If the COD is large, then the bell curve goes out because you have value points that are further away from the midpoint. Our CODs have been very tight, and I think a lot of that is in cities like this, there's a lot of homogeneousness with the properties, a lot of similarities, a lot of tracts of neighborhoods and so forth. We find the CODs are higher in the rural communities because they have a lot of different variances of houses and how the lots are set up and so forth. But here the lots are smaller, there's a lot of city and neighborhoods and so forth, so that helps with the coefficient of dispersion being lower. It also helps that we have a large number of sales, so the more data you have, the more you have the ability to make things more accurate. So for the single-family median finalized at 99%, the two-family was at 100, and the three-family was at 96, but the sample size for the three families was only 10 sales. It's a small sample. And the CODs, as you can see, are well below the requirements of the 10 to 12% that we need, being in the low 5s, mid 7s, and under 5 for the three-family. So the median sale price for the single families ended up being about $412,000. And interesting, the two-family was just slightly higher. I think that's also because you're realizing that the single families, you have some pretty high-end properties too, and where the two families sometimes are more consistent in the type of property it is. With the single families, you could have some low end at the 300, but you can have $700,000 houses. So I think that's why they were relatively similar. And of course, the three family would be larger just because you've got that extra unit. If we go down to the styles, the ranches, split levels, colonials, capes, bungalows, conventionals, modern contemporary, raised ranch, and Gambrel, those are the major styles for the residential homes. And you can see that all of them are well within the 100% range. The range only goes from 98 to 101, so they're very consistent, and they're all well under the 10% requirement from the IAAO. So they're very consistent, and their coefficient dispersions are low, meaning that there's equity within most of those all of those groups. All right, so if I go to the next page, these are the neighborhoods, and so the codes EA, like early average, meaning early construction, and then early fair, early good, and then there's things like average for multi and new average, new fair. These were kind of how they were designed to begin with, and this is how we kept it within the groupings, because a lot of the developments in Nashua occurred at different time frames, and so that kind of ties into the ages of the properties and their conditions. So the counts are indicated for all of these neighborhoods, and again, the medians are very tight. When you get to the small counts of 4 or 5, 2 sales, it might be a little bit less at 100% because of the sample size, but anything with the large sample size was between 98 and 101, and all the coefficient of dispersions were well under 10% for anything with a large sample. So again, I think it just shows that looking at the properties from different angles, looking at it from the use, the style, and the neighborhood, we tried to make sure that looking at those variables that are important for value, that they were consistent and that we had equity among all of those different types of looks at the value.
Mike, could I ask you what the difference is between early and new, roughly?
Yeah, June, that's
So
brand new or?
New was just newer, no, I'm sorry, newer construction neighborhoods versus early 1900 more
Oh, okay,
neighborhoods.
so like 1950 and above, maybe, or,
Yeah, pretty much.
thank you.
And, Mr. Chair, the very last one, HF, what is that on the list?
I think that was highway fare.
Missed the list.
I'm sorry, what was that?
You said highway, can you give an example of highway fare, what that means?
Close to the
I
highway.
would imagine it was abutting the highway that cuts through, and so the location itself was less desirable than, you know, maybe the average the next street over, because you're abutting the highway.
Right.
Probably have that wall up behind them, right? A lot of them had,
The sound barrier
Sound
wall,
barrier, yeah.
yeah.
So Spindlewick, Parnell Place, the sound barrier goes right along those 2 streets. So those houses are impacted, is what you're saying?
I would have to check the GIS map to double check which neighborhoods it is, but that would be the same, the type of property.
Any questions on that sheet? Other questions?
No, I don't have any.
Okay. And then the other neighborhoods are similar, it's just that they're identified with 2 and 3 families, even though they could be within the same neighborhoods, but they're identified for valuation purposes, 2 and 3, so you can compare the difference between those to the singles. And those medians were also very tight, and within 4 or 5% of 100%, and the CODs were relatively low. And then we look at things like age of the property was the next thing that we looked at. So this ties in with the early average and the new average, Robert, that you were questioning. So now we look at older properties to mid-year properties to newer properties to see if we have equity within a few percentage points of the 100%. And as you can see, the medians for all of these groupings were between 98 and 102, so no more than a variance of 2%, which is extremely tight. And the CODs, again, are well below the requirements of the 10%. So this is, like I said, we like to look at it based on style, use, neighborhood. Now we like to also look at it based on age. Those are some of the major variables that we're looking at for valuation, because it's really the things that people are looking at in the market. You know, where is the house located? What type of house is it? How old is the house? And those things affect the value of a property. So those are some of the things that we key in on. We do look at other things like building size and lot size and so forth. But in a community like this, lot size doesn't vary as much as a variable because, you know, they're smaller lots, and a lot is a lot, be it 15,000 square feet or 8. You can only put one house on it, but you might have a little bigger yard for entertaining or something like that. Then, yeah, go ahead.
Just, maybe you may not be able to answer this. Nashua really exploded in growth from 66 to 90. I mean, that's when the city really took off.
Mm-hmm.
But the largest number of sales was for properties that were built from 51 to 65. I mean, it's just the way the numbers played out more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, we could run a study of the 28,000 and see how many are in each age group and what percentage this is. But any given cycle of value, there's more desirability sometimes. Years ago, everybody wanted the colonial and the two-story. Now, as a lot of the baby boomers are aging and people are downsizing, the properties that are older that were capes and ranches are actually becoming more desirable, and they're more in that age bracket than the colonials are. So I think some of that has to do with the type of property demand there is in the market at any given time.
Thank you.
Sure. And then the last items are basically like the manufactured homes, 57 of them at 97%. Then we have like the double wide or the standard ones. And then we get into the condominiums, the ones with land and without land. So you can see that the median for the manufactured homes at 97%. The COD is 9. The reason why the COD is a little higher with the manufactured homes is because they're a smaller type property and the values are lower. So there may be a variance of dollars that are small, but the percentages might be slightly larger because it's not, you know, the average is $125,000. So you say, oh, the prices vary by $10,000. That's not a lot of money, but it's 10% or 8%. Whereas if you're looking at a property like $400,000, 10% would be $40,000. So the CODs vary a little bit higher with the manufacturing, just because it's a smaller type of value situation. And then going into the condominiums, they were at 98 and 100% for the median, and the CODs were very low. But the condominiums, they were fairly high too. They've gone up quite a bit, and there's a demand for them. So if we go to the next page where we look at the styles of the condominiums, you can see that the consistency of them are very similar. The medians for the 55 DN, and then all of the rest of them are right around that 100%. And you know, 2 of them only had 1 sale, so it's not really a sample, but they still were within the requirements. But the garden style and townhouse were obviously the most desirable, and their CODs are relatively low as the singles or lower. And the reason for that is that, again, looking at them in different ways, we identify the condos by the styles on a more of a high level, and then we look at each complex. So within each complex, we can make further adjustments beyond the styles to further define the values and make them tight and consistent within the complexes. Some complexes may not have sales. We'll compare them to other complexes that were similar that have sales. Some have a lot of sales, and they become almost an island by themselves because the people are desired to go to that complex. And the sales pretty much speak for the variables within the complex beyond the style in the complex itself. End unit, upper level, lower level, views, those kinds of things. So we make further adjustments. It's kind of a three-tier. We do the style, we do the complex, and then we do the items of variables within the complex. It gives us the ability to be pretty accurate in the valuation process for the condos. Any questions on the manufactured homes or condos? Okay. And then the commercial, there's not as many sales. We did have a fair amount of apartment sales. They're still desirable. We were within 3% of the 100, and the COD was very low. Mixed use, there were a few sales. There's a little typo there. I think it should be 98% for the median, not 987%. And the commercials, there's 26 sales there. Very tight on the median. In industrial, there were also 26 sales and tight on the median. We use this as a guide, but because it's minimal number of sales and there's so many different types of commercials, we rely much more heavier on the income approach, the rents that they get, the expense ratios, the vacancy ratios, and the capitalization rates to capitalize the income stream to a value. So, but these are used as a test. These sales will do the income approach and will adjust construction costs and adjust land to that income approach. Then we'll test the sales to make sure that they're supporting the income approach. So we really do look at all three approaches to value, but I think the one that's used the most for determining value for commercials and industrials is the income approach.
So were they fairly forthcoming with the rental income when you approached these property owners?
I didn't have the count, but we had a decent amount of information, but we also use a lot of CoStar and surveys and additional information beyond the rents. We did have a decent amount of apartment rents, and we would get some commercial and industrial. What would be good about it was we would get all that information from the city, then we could test it with all the surveys that are done with the other services that we can use, so that we could then compare and see how close the actuals were to what's been surveyed by other services of the actuals. So we had a lot of information to give us particular details of the properties, but also nice surveys to give us a trend of not just here, but the neighboring communities and what's going on in the area.
Going back to the condos for just a moment.
Yeah, sure.
They were what, over $600,000. Were a lot of those sales Sky Meadow? Is that?
That's with land. One's with land, right? Yeah, the 101, 102.
Ones with land.
Some of them were Sky Meadows, but there's so many. We did have sales in Sky Meadows, but there were other condominiums that were right up there as well. Groton Woods was another one that has high sales. And on the hub, there is also a condominium by complex, and it shows every single complex and all the sales within each complex. So that's available to see as well.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So that basically gives you a summarization of where we stood with the hearing process and where we stand with the end results of the values after doing all of the cleanup and entering of the information. And we're at a point now where we're ready to send out those changes per your approval and mail out the second notice of either telling them there was a change or there wasn't a change. And we're finalizing the values now for the assessors so that they can develop their MS1 to do their hearings and so forth. So we've pretty much completed the process. The thing we will have to do for you is once they finalize their values and looking at everything, from the work we did. We're going to finalize an appraisal documentation manual for you that will put all the documents and everything we used into a book, and so that you'll have access to that to be used. It's an actual appraisal, mass appraisal, but it also is a good manual for continuing to use it as a guide going forward. That would be the last deliverable that we have, other than assisting with abatements as they come in. So, are there any other questions that you have for us? That pretty much covers what we wanted to talk about today.
Do you have the overall percentage change in value
Did you guys
with the 10 billion number versus the 14 billion number? What was the actual percentage?
From the hearing?
No, I think for the value for the whole town.
What was the final number that you came up with? I think Director Kleiner might have that.
Yes, so I provided you a sheet today. I need to stress that this is not final, this is preliminary. There's a number of pieces that the team hasn't had a chance to work through, right? So utilities are done by George Sansucci and his group. We have not received those final values. Neither have we calculated the value of the TIF. And there's a few pilot agreements left to be worked out. So I just don't want anyone to take this as what the final number may be. We have until October 17th to prepare that and submit it to the DRA. So still a couple more weeks to go. But this sheet that I did provide you speaks directly to your point, Mr. Hansberry, of how much value we have picked up due to the revaluation. So you will see in 2021, the final MS1 there, that's the third column over. Basically, if you compare that figure to what we have as of now, it's roughly about 3.5 billion.
3.5 billion.
If you're looking, I know there's been a lot of question about the shift. And if you look at the second page, we addressed that. So in 2021, residential properties reflected about 65% of the total assessments. At the end of the revaluation, it's now about 69.6% for residential, where commercial represented about 31.5% of the total properties, and now that is about 27.7%.
I have a question. I don't know if it's for Mike or Kim, but we've been telling people up to now that they could come in and ask questions about their own property. And a lot of people seem to have a question about their neighbor's property being different than theirs. What will be the process for those people going forward? How will we be able to resolve those questions or answer those questions? Will Vision be involved in that, or is that going to be on the city?
I think at this point, questions that come in after the hearing process will be addressed by the assessors, and then they'll guide them on their path. If they can just answer the general question, they can answer it. If they feel that because of other people's, they want to have an abatement for themselves, they can file an abatement and go through that process. And that process there, the abatements will be looked at by the assessors with guidance from Vision. So I think right now, questions coming in is pretty much done by our staff. It's now going to be directed over to the assessor's office.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions. Paul, do you have any questions?
I do not, thank you. It was very helpful.
Sure, no problem.
I just want to say thank you very much, too. I thought the data presentation every time you came forward was really extremely well done, and I thank you for that.
I do too.
Sure. We've done this a few times, so. But I think the important thing is to understand that it's not just us, it takes a village to do this, and the assessing staff was fantastic. Considering everything going on with the health of people and all the different things, I thought that, and I mentioned this to Kim at our meeting yesterday, that the assistance we got from the city of Nashua was fantastic, especially considering we were a little handicapped because we had to work on a different product than our own. Not that we haven't worked on that, but it was, it just adds a little bit more effort and so forth. So we have a good team, and I think they did a really good job, but I think that the success was a joint effort. And so we appreciate doing the work for you, and it was a couple of years of some challenges, but I think overall, talking with Kim and the team, they were very pleased with how the results were, and we were pleased with how the results were. And I also want to say that the support from the city, from the taxpayers that came in, was excellent. So thank you for choosing us and for us to be able to work with you. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, well, next we'll go to Kim Kleiner. Kim Kleiner, Director.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I wonder if I could be recognized for a statement before we go to the next item of business.
sure.
State law, the right to know law requires that when someone's not able to be physically present for a meeting, they have to give the reason why that's so. So I just would like the minutes to show that I'm participating in today's board meeting electronically due to having tested positive for COVID. And I would note that I'm connecting from my home in Nashua, and there's no one else in the room with me.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Next, we will go to Kim Kleiner, Director of Administrative Services, for her comments.
Thank you very much, Board. So I believe you may have received an email that was put out by the mayor's office. Today is my last day with the city of Nashua. It has been an extreme pleasure to work for Nashua, with the staff in Nashua, and this is my hometown, so that added in as well. Director Cummings will be interim director and then appointed by Mayor Donchis, and you couldn't have gotten a better choice because he has a lot of assessing knowledge. Where originally when I came in, I was probably a little bit more behind the eight ball than Mr. Cummings, but I have to say thank you to the team in assessing. I've learned more than I may have ever wanted to know about assessing, and I will take that knowledge. I have to echo Mr. Torello's points. You have an amazing assessing staff. And I've said that since day one, and every day they amaze me more. We've definitely had our challenges. Working with Vision for the past couple of years has been a complete pleasure. I think we've all learned from them. They are amazingly knowledgeable about all areas. So we thank them very, very much. Having said that, the team is going to be working on the MS1, and they will be preparing that and bringing that back for your signature. Once that is prepared, there are those items which I've already previously mentioned, the utilities, the TIF, and some pilots. We certainly will try to address any questions that come forth as we can. But most of the questions probably would have been dealt with during the informal hearing process. We will be posting later today the final values out on the revaluation hub. So we would ask our residents if they're interested, they should look there for that data. And it will be by street and by owner name, just as the preliminary data was published. And thank you very much for the
Thank you.
pleasure of working with you.
Thank you, and good luck with everything going forward. Okay. Kim, was there anything on the continuation of Zoom meetings?
So this came to us a little while ago. You may or may not know that the Board of Aldermen are only conducting Zoom for staff or for board members when it is deemed necessary and approved by the president of the board. We have had very limited Zoom participation from the public. It is quite a bit of work for our CTV team, as well as our administrative team. So the question was raised as to whether the board wanted to continue with the Zoom meetings, every meeting, or whether we wanted to work similar to the Board of Aldermen, and if a board member needed access or a staff member had to present to you, and for some reason, COVID or whatever, could not be in the room, a link could be issued internally. That was something that would be up to the board.
Okay, I would agree with doing it that way. I don't know if we have to make a vote on it, or just,
You do need a vote.
we need a vote, okay. Can I get a motion to agree to mimic the Board of Aldermen's approach to Zoom meetings, wherein if a member of the board or a member of the assessing staff cannot make a meeting, we'll have Zoom for those people only?
So moved.
And I'll second.
Can I get a second? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, but Mr. Chairman, because I'm participating electronically, all votes have to be by roll call.
Okay, can we get a vote by roll call then? Mr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Mr. Hansberry?
Yes.
Mr. Early, yes. All right, so the motion carries. Going forward, we'll only have Zoom when a staff or board member cannot make the meeting. Okay, public comment. Are there any people for public comment? Seeing none. Comments by members of the board. Dan?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to thank Director Kleiner for her service. She put in endless hours in that position, and her leaving is really a tremendous loss for the city, and I wish her the best of luck in her new position. It's really been a pleasure working with you and getting to know you.
Thank you.
I agree. Thank you, Kim.
And Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
If I might, I also would like to send my thanks to Mrs. Kleiner for all she's contributed to the city, and especially helping out with the assessing department. I would also like to thank Mr. Hansberry for his years of service on the Board of Assessors and in other roles for the city as well. I believe this is his last meeting before stepping down, and his experience and knowledge will be missed.
You're here. I agree.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Now, can I move, with nothing else, comments by members of the board, non-public? I move to go into, can I get a motion to go into non-public for two reasons? First, to discuss matters which, if discussed in public, would likely affect adversely the reputation of any person other than a member of this board, unless such person requests an open meeting. This exemption shall extend to include any application for assistance or tax abatement or waiver of a fee, fine, or other levy, if based on inability to pay or poverty of the applicant, pursuant to RSA 91-A:3, 11, parenthetical C. Second, under 91-A:3, section 2, parenthetical 1, for the consideration of legal advice provided by legal counsel, either in writing or orally, to one or more members of the public body, even where legal counsel is not present.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, roll call. Mr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Mr. Hansberry?
Yes.
Mr. Early, yes. We are now in non-public.
All right, I will confirm we're off the air.
Thank you.
Great.